people. You mute people, do you? Perhaps when he mutes everybody, that noise will disappear. Maybe.
Muted.
Yeah.
Or not?
No, we're not.
We're not muted.
Oh.
Okay. I'd like to know. Hi, Irene.
Hi.
Hello, Irene.
Yeah. Down bottom right hand. Oh,
Hello, Andrew Margolis.
Oh. Message for 4 minutes, please.
Ah, yes, there's an arrow there. Oh, that's got good turnout. Wonder who it is with this. Ah, there it is. Excellent. Did you do that, or did it just come up by itself?
It's the wonders of modern technology.
You can use us.
You can mute everyone.
I'm very comfortable. I like this. It's the 9th of September, just before Yom Tov.
I want to ask David if this background noise or not.
Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. At the moment, you are all unmuted, but that will change because I'm just about to mute you all. And let's see what happens. So I have muted you all. And also, I must warn you that you are at least officially being recorded onto the cloud. What happens after that is entirely in the hands of technologists way beyond me. You are all apparently able to unmute yourselves. So when we get onto our speakers, I hope they will be able to do that. Otherwise, it'll be a very quiet meeting. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Top of the Hill once again. And I hope you've all got your Pimm's or glass of cold beer to hand. Or if you're watching from the Lake District, I hope you've got your wellies and water wings available. And we have a very interesting and novel presentation for you this afternoon. We've all heard of Alexandra Palace. Even I, from the fastnesses of Manchester, had heard of Palace, although knew more or less nothing about it. And I suspect most of us are still in the position of having heard of it and possibly even having walked around the grounds, but knowing very little actually about the place. But that is all going to change this afternoon when, for the first time ever, we have a trio of speakers. Louise Stewart, who is the Chief Executive of Alexandra Palace Trust, Mark Civil, who is the Head of Learning and Participation there, and Natalie Layton, who is actually not going to be speaking, but is there just to keep the other two in order. She said she's going to take notes of questions, actions, and bad behaviour on our part, so perhaps we'll keep her busy with comments and questions, but not with anything else. So I'm delighted to welcome, to start with, Louise Stewart, who is the Chief Executive, and with a bit of luck, we'll be able to share her screen as she already has done. So Louise, over to you.
Well, the first thing to do is test if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent, that's good. So hello.
Can you speak up a little or sit closer to your microphone, please?
Okay, I will try to do that. Is that better?
That is much better, given the age of at least one or two of our members of the audience.
Okay, so I will whiz through a presentation and hopefully Mark will whiz through his section as well, because what I find with things about Alexandra Palace is the most interesting part of any presentation is usually the questions that the audience have. So hopefully you'll have plenty of juicy questions for us. So first of all is working out whether I can actually move the slides on the screen. So you'll all be familiar, hopefully, with Alexandra Palace. It's a 7.5 acre building and it's sat within 196 acres of informal parkland, sat on the top of the hill overlooking, it has the best panoramic view of London, overlooking London. It's been around for about 150 years. It started off as a paid-for attraction. We've done some wacky things in that time, from clown cricket and other forms of dubious entertainment. We've played our role in public duty in terms of being a refugee and internment camp during the World Wars. And we also had a race course in the park until the early 70s with associated buildings. So the park you see today looks fairly different in places, and you can still track the old race course. Early roller coaster events before health and safety became a thing that we had to take account of. And you can still see the remnants of the old Lido, which on a day like today, I really wish we still had. Some of you will have heard in recent years about the theatre that has been disused for between 80 and 100 years. And it's most notable on the world stage and the UK stage as being the birthplace of BBC television. So very quick history. The park was created in 1863 and the palace came along 10 years later. They were the brainchild of Victorian entrepreneurs who thought they would get rich on it, I'm sure. But 2 weeks after opening, the palace burned down. Now, whilst it was rebuilt within just 2 years, which is fairly phenomenal, it is the start of the financial ups and downs that the palace has witnessed ever since. The entrepreneurs never really recovered their finances. And so in 1901, the park and palace were handed over to public ownership, and through an act of parliament, they became held in trust. And in the 60s, those trusts were recognised as charitable. In 1980, the trust was transferred to Haringey Council, and that makes Haringey the sole corporate trustee. So the council own the park and palace, but only in trust, which means that they have to stay in line with charity law. So the charitable trust operates independently of the council and its policies and its decision-making processes, but it does benefit from an annual grant which covers a portion of its running costs. Those financial woes that I was mentioning earlier hit Haringey hard soon after it inherited the palace. In 1980, most people locally who've been around a while know about the fire. It destroyed a vast proportion of the fire, of the palace, and left us with a level of dereliction for a long time. And these pictures are what exists today. So whilst they're beautiful in their own right and interesting in their own right, they're unusable, although we do tours of them from time to time. The theatre had been unused before the 1980s fire. In its time, it had been used as a BBC prop store, a hospital during the wars, a chapel, and various other things, including a cinema. So the Act of Parliament sets out very clearly what we're here to do, which is to repair, restore and maintain the assets for the purposes of recreation, education and enjoyment for the public forever. And our purpose is, so why do we do that? And we think our purpose is everything is about enriching people's lives, just enriching lives through great experiences. And that's whether you walk through the park for a nice solitary walk in spring, or whether you try and find a space in the park on a summer's day, which is definitely less solitary, attending a tech fair or trade exhibition, enjoying a pint or two at the darts, attending a music gig, or having a whirl around on the ice rink, which is inside the palace. The charity is funded, and these are all prepared pre-pandemic, so the situation looks a bit different today. But to operate every year, we need £3.6 million, and that pays for a basic level of maintenance, repair and operation to keep the site safely open. And we achieve that through income that we generate on site, through leisure activities and events, The properties in the park, so the cafes that you may have enjoyed, they're not actually operated by the trust. They're leased to individual businesses. We also receive grants and donations, and we do an amount of public fundraising, which in recent months has been extremely important. One of the things that we haven't really shouted about in the past has been the value of the palace, not just for the community of North London and further afield, but its economic value. And we independently had that assessed, and every year the palace has an economic impact locally of £167 million. So if the palace wasn't there, the economy of North London would look slightly differently, I think. Over time, we intend to become more financially self-sustaining, and we were achieving that with Haringey's funding in red going down over the years, and the amount of income we generated ourselves was going up. Now that's a good story, apart from the fact that the total funding available didn't really change, it decreased. And that's not taken into account the fact that in the last 8 years, obviously, inflation, prices have gone up, the cost of labour has gone up, the cost of maintenance and repair works has gone up. So we've probably got less money now, a long way short of what we had 10 years ago. But that doesn't quell our ambition. So we aim to create an all year round cultural visitor destination where people come to be entertained, to find out about our heritage, and to explore their creativity and express their creativity and just experience our unique heritage setting. And one of our key ambitions is to always keep the park and palace relevant to a changing society, so that over 150 years, we have managed to hold that zeitgeist of what people enjoy. And we try to do that through the events we put on and the activities that we host. And that will help us to achieve a level of physical building and infrastructure resilience, but also financial resilience to continue to deliver public benefit for future generations. And that's essentially what we're trying to achieve in everything that we do. Our most recent achievement has been the restoration of the theatre in East Court through the East Wing programme. A significant amount of works to make a derelict theatre still look derelict and spend £10 million on it. So the work, people often say, well, what did you spend the money on? Well, it was a mixture of very careful, sensitive renovation, historic conservation work, but it was also massive amounts of infrastructure to make the space safe for performances for the modern day. Now, if anybody's ever paid for scaffolding on their house, you will know by looking at this picture where the money went. To put that up and put it down is eye-watering, but absolutely essential to preserve the ceiling, which is one of the unique features of the space. And that gives us a modern visitor experience within a unique heritage setting. Now, it would have been cheaper to do a black box restoration and just put a theatre inside there. It wouldn't have been unique, and it wouldn't have told the history of the space. The theatre has been derelict for longer than it's actually been operational. So that's really important in telling the story. We also have been able to put in the facilities that you would expect in a theatre. So there is now a theatre bar and some amazing toilets that I rave about. But also, which is probably less celebrated, is the East Court that you enter the theatre through. And the East Court is a great asset for the local community and visitors to Alexandra Palace, because pre-pandemic, this was a space that was open to the public every day. And this is what we like to think of as our story space. This is where we as a trust do our activity and showcase our story. And there's nowhere else in the palace that we can really do that. Nestled in the corner and launched earlier this year is the Creativity Pavilion. And this is a space in which we do our creative education work and creative learning work that Mark's going to talk about. And this is an amazing space, which is really unique. And we can use it for all sorts of learning. So these pictures here, they're not great quality, but our first exhibition, which we hosted in there, was the Portraits for Posterity exhibition, which is a massive exhibition from about 10 years ago, which features survivors of the Holocaust, which I thought you might be interested in. And these feature people particularly from the local area. And it was a really emotive exhibition, and it was a real opportunity to engage the public in this story that may not have been in contact with it in quite that emotive way before. And I think that brings me nicely on to what we really believe is the next phase of the palace, which is remembering that it's not just about the building, it's not just about the physical assets, it's about the people and communities whose lives it affects, and really building the advocacy for them. And it's something that the palace hasn't done so much of in the past, but it's definitely what we need to do in the future, so that people continue to love it and cherish it and support it and get enjoyment from it. And one of the things that we can use to do that is our archive and collection. Now, a great story of most historic houses is some landed gentry person goes, oh, and I went in the attic and I found this Rubens painting or something. Well, we went into the East Wing and found our archive, which was it was thought lost in the 80s fire. And it is in desperate need of care and attention, but we now have a mass amount of materials that enables us to undertake research and build that archive to tell the many amazing stories and untold stories of what has happened at the palace in the past. And it's also allowed us to create new partnerships, such as the one with Google, who lent us a scanner, a massive high resolution scanner, and trained our volunteers to use it, so that we went from having no archive to a digitized archive in a matter of months, which is a major achievement when we did it on a budget of fumes and a lot of volunteer hours, for which we're very grateful. And it's just another way of making this place mean something to people. And it's something that I'm very passionate about, because a large Victorian building doesn't speak to a lot of people in this country or in London these days. It's not part of their cultural identity. But actually, Alexandra Palace it was built as the People's Palace. And there are some amazing stories in it, from the female technicians behind the men that you hear about in terms of TV production. There are amazing Black history stories. There are some fantastic stories around the World War usage, and it's really helping us to uncover how do we engage with communities that may not think that this place is for them because it doesn't tell their story, but in actual fact it probably does. We just haven't unearthed it yet. And one of the things I thought you might be interested in, and you may already know this, so forgive me, but the birth of BBC television at the Palace was actually a competition between two companies. And when you ask people who invented television, most people would say John Logie Baird, but no one person can be held responsible or take credit for it. It was technologies by different people over several years. But BBC television was definitely not John Logie Baird or the company that he founded. It was actually Marconi EMI, and the team was led by Sir Isaac Schoenberg. And he's a little known figure to the majority of the population, although he did receive public recognition in 1962. And through our archive work, we've contacted the Schoenberg Family Archive, and we've been able to tell part of his story on Google Arts and Culture. So it's now online, and there's more of that information available. And one of our ambitions is to actually host a physical exhibition in the East Court to tell that story. So it's just some of the things that we could do in the future. But first of all, we have to get through the pandemic. And on that note, I will hand over to Mark Civil, who is our head of creative learning, to share his screen. So I'll stop sharing my screen for now and hand over.
Thank you very much, Louise, and welcome to Mark.
Am I going to do this right?
Wherever you are.
No, we can all see your email though, Mark.
Yes.
There we go.
Again, Mark, can you speak up, please, or get closer to your microphones?
I can. How's that?
That's better, thank you.
That's good. Okay, so sort of, I guess I'm picking up the story from Louise from 2012 when my department, the creative learning team, was born, and really what it is just picking up on those kind of Victorian values of learning engagement, but just doing it in a much more contemporary way. I guess in terms of thinking about the palace's history, all the assets that we have, the theatre, the Great Hall, the 192 acres of parkland, it's our job as a department to make sure that they are accessible and inclusive for the whole of Haringey, and to make sure that everybody can have access to them. And there can be a lot of barriers to people coming up to the palace. For example, it's at the top of a pretty steep hill. So if you have mobility issues, that can be a challenge for you. If you're a young person living on a particular side of Haringey, there may well be a postcode war which would make you uneasy about traveling across. So it's our job to think about projects and activities that can engage everyone and make sure that everyone feels represented and has a place at the palace, can meet, socialize here, learn something about our past, and have a good time, make new memories while learning about the past. So since we first started, we built this department from the ground up, so that we had no participants initially, and now 8 years on, we work regularly with about 10,000 participants across Haringey. We work with older people, we work with people with dementia, we work with people who have mental health concerns, we work with young people with social and emotional behavioral needs, we work with young people in danger of committing knife crime or are already part of the youth justice system, young carers, you name it. We are trying to design projects to reach the whole of our community. So we work with people from all walks of life and all ages. But the most established part of our program is our schools program, our big schools program, which started life in terms of thinking about making that transition from primary school to secondary school. So thinking about going from little school to big school. But we thought that was a great concept. So we started to think about our education program in terms of thinking about transitions. So you might be new to Haringey or new to the country, and our programs might support you. You might be a young person with special education needs who's worried about making the transition from school to the workplace. We have programs to support you. You might be a university student who's just coming out of university, having studied arts management. We might have placements for you to give you that launch into the big school of life. And also, the Big Schools program is a nod to the fact that Ali Pali is just big. It's huge. And we have spaces that can accommodate 10,000 people. As I said, we have 196 acres of land. We have a theatre that can seat 1,000 people in a specific configuration, so that we can do things on a scale that other kind of charities aren't always able to do. And one of our biggest projects in the year is the Big Schools Day, which we've been working with BAFTA on over the last 3 years. And that enables young kids from primary and first and second years of secondary education to work with some of the biggest stars in film and television for a day. So we bring over 1,000 kids together. The last time that we did it pre-COVID was that we brought together 1,222 young people from Haringey to work with filmmakers. So we had the director of Paddington 2. We had some stars from film and TV. And the young people work with these artists and learn about the industry. So we're about kind of inspiring them to learn about some of those creative roles that they may not necessarily know about. So the lighting designer, the scenic painter, to show them that there are lots and lots of interesting careers that you can follow by working in the creative industries. We also have a Big Schools SEN program, which the image on your screens is from, where we brought together 300 young people with disabilities across the region to perform choreography that they had built, working with some of the leading disabled artists in the dance field of dance. We are very conscious, as I said, that there are challenges to attending, to always coming up on site to Alexandra Palace. So all of our programs have an outreach element. And I just want to talk to you about two of our schools outreach programs. One is called Biblio-buzz, which is a book award for children. And it's a unique book award because the children vote for their favorite author. So it's shortlisted by a group of school librarians, and then over 1,000, again, approximately 1,200 young people work with us through 33 of our schools and all 9 of the libraries in Haringey, and they all go on a reading challenge, and they read 6 novels. Then in normal times, they would come together in the theatre, meet their authors, and then vote for their favourite book. And the author would be awarded a prize. We also work. We have a little bit less traction in the east of the borough, and so we want to do more with our schools program there. We know that in certain schools, there's something. Certain schools in the borough, they're English as a second language. There are something like 172 languages spoken in some primary schools in Haringey. And so we have built a project which helps work with young people who have English as a second language to help develop their language skills. So we use drama techniques in schools, particularly predominantly in the east of the borough, to regularly use play and storytelling and drama techniques to help develop their language skills. And then at the end of the year, they come to the theatre at Alexandra Palace to present their work. Obviously, one of the best ways that we can reach people is online, and this has become something of a lifeline during lockdown. We've set, I think we have 6 challenges running online at the moment for young people and for people of all ages. So if you do get a chance, do have a little roam around our website under the creative learning pages, and you will find challenges and activities for people of all ages to keep you engaged and stimulated, particularly during lockdown. But we set challenges which people can kind of access worldwide. Each year we have a Little Inventors project which challenges people, young people, to make and design an invention which we will make and turn into an exhibition. This year's exhibition or invention challenge is particularly park-based because the park has become something of a lifeline during lockdown. So we're asking young people to create an invention that will support some of the, what we call the stars, the wildlife stars of the park. So you could build a feeding station for a squirrel, a hotel for a dung beetle. We want to kind of ignite young people's imagination. And at the end of this process, we're going to select 6 winners, which will be turned into sculptures that will be placed in our outdoor learning environment. Speaking of outdoor learning environments, last year we developed a Wild in the Park program, which teaches young people in particular about how to be a good citizen and to use the park well. Also the benefits of working and being outside in terms of promoting good health and well-being. So we want young people to put down their iPads, step away from their mobile phones, and learn about den building or making a fire, roasting marshmallows on the fire, having a sing-song around a campfire, learning about the call of different birds. And we are, in our first year of developing this program, we work with over 2,000 young people, including several flagship pilot programs working with young people with disabilities and young people with social, emotional and behavioral needs. And at the bottom of each slide, there's just some some quotes from all of our participants highlighted in blue, which make for some fun reading. But what about those young people that are not in school or formal education? I wasn't particularly a good student. I wasn't particularly academic. I wasn't particularly interested in school. It took me until I went to university to develop an interest in education. But there are lots of young people whose interest in the creative industries in particular we want to harness. So my passion was always for fine art and drawing, but there are young people who do not believe themselves to be particularly into education, but have taught themselves how to use music software to make music, to make beats. There are young musicians who are fanatical about singing or beatboxing. There are young people who are into fashion and fine art, and that energy may not be harnessed in their school. So we wanted to build programs that could harness that and give them some opportunities that we as a large cultural organization can provide. So we developed the youth programming team, which this year, which enables 20 young people from Haringey to join the creative learning team. And they're going to design 8 projects which they will deliver. It could be an art trail through the park. It could be a young people's festival. It could be a grime night in the East Court. And we will give them a budget, which they will have to manage and oversee. And they, at the end of the year, will have produced, with the support of the expertise of the Alexandra Palace team, 8 events. We also have a young people's creative network. So in order to succeed in this industry, it's quite often who you know, what you know. Everybody kind of has heard that phrase. And actually for some young people from certain backgrounds, their parents may not regularly take them to the theatre. They may not regularly be involved in certain cultural activities. And so actually their little black book in terms of peers who are succeeding in the industry as they get older may not be as vast as other people's. So we've set up the Young People's Network, which is for people, just as I described, young people who have a passion for the creative industries, who can come together, see some events here for free, go on cultural trips in London, experience culture with the support of us, and attend workshops that will help them succeed in this industry, like how to put a budget together, how to work with a tax if you're a freelancer. You know, some of those things that some of us struggled with when we were just starting out in this industry, we will put on workshops to help them survive in this industry and hear from other artists that have done it. And they, of course, will become their own network, which will hopefully support them for life. We are really keen, when we're living not in lockdown, to bring as many different communities of people to work and live and have access to aspects of the palace in the creativity pavilion that Louise talked about earlier. But we also have a centre for wellbeing, which was designed with Dulux and a company called Target to support people with dementia to be able to navigate their way through that space. And we put a lot of projects on for people with dementia in that space. We have an activity called Singing for the Brain, where we invite people with early onset of dementia to come and sing every week, and just, you know, come together, socialize, and unlock memories through the use of music. We also have a wellness cafe, which happens once a month, which is just an opportunity for people to come together and drink tea and eat some biscuits and have some cake, but also perhaps listen to a jazz quartet or make Christmas cards, or, you know, so you can kind of get involved in a creative activity. Also, once a month, we have a project called Coffee and Computers for older people, which you can come along, have a slice of free cake and a coffee, and bring your mobile phone or your iPad, and we will have volunteers on site that can help you to make the most of modern technology. So you can see that somebody came along to Coffee and Computers and it helped them to Skype a grandchild in Jamaica. So it's a possibility to kind of update your IT skills in a nice informal way. As always, we have an outreach program for those people that are not necessarily able to make the journey up the hill. We have a project called Sensory Suitcase that tours around all of the residential homes in Haringey, and it's built of sensory objects that older people with dementia work with a facilitator who's one of our volunteers usually, who engage with storytelling with objects from Alexandra Palace's past. And it's really about kind of working with the person with dementia and their carer, because quite often what we found is that the relationship between the person with dementia and their carer can be quite difficult over time. It can be quite complicated and fractious. And this is just a kind of playful task that tours around the borough and has been widely adopted by residential homes in Haringey. We work with adults with disabilities. There's some really good provision for young people with disabilities in Haringey, but it really drops off age 16. And so we've wanted to make a connection between our events department, our world-class events department, and providing opportunities to learn new skills and work-based opportunities for people with disabilities. So every 3 times a year. Sorry, I'm actually on site, which means I have to answer my my walkie-talkie from time to time. I'm nearly there, so I'll plough through. So we invite 15 adults with disabilities to come and work with us over a 10-week period and learn skills on how to put on an event. And they create and turn the theatre into a nightclub 3 times a year. And it's a space for adults with disabilities to come together to be able to dance, flirt, and meet new people. And there are a real dearth of spaces in Haringey for people with disabilities to come together. And this is my favorite quote of all of our work. "Dancing all night with my walking stick made me insanely happy," was something somebody wrote at the last event that we delivered of Rhythm Stick. We're also very keen to work with underrepresented communities in Haringey. And as Louise alluded to earlier in her presentation, you know, since the 1960s, there's been a rethink about how people tell stories to be more inclusive of different communities, different people. Stories not necessarily about winners and losers, stories from different perspectives. And some of the work that we do is about retracing the stories that have disappeared from our archive and kind of telling stories around the BAME community or the LGBTQ plus community. So some of the work that we've done is work closely with historians and tour specialists to provide specific tours that engage different communities in our histories. We also mark specific events. For example, we have a Windrush Day project every year. We will also mark the Holocaust Memorial Day in some way, and Black History Month. And it's our job to kind of design projects that enable communities to access those histories. I think we're almost there. I always like to end on a little nod to our volunteers, just in case there are any budding volunteers in our audience today. We have, as also part of the Creative Learning Department's provision to oversee the work of 137 active volunteers, 70 of those work in our theatre and get to see regularly, until recently, theatre productions, live events. But volunteers also work in our archive, as Louise was talking about earlier. They are stewards for shows. They help with fundraising. They support with learning and engagement activities. They give an incredible amount to Alexandra Palace, over just under 6,000 hours a year, which works out almost to a full-time person working 4 days a week, every week of the year at Alexandra Palace. And they deliver an incredible 1,207 shifts. And without them, I remind them frequently, we are nothing. They absolutely support us to deliver key aspects of our program, and they're incredibly passionate and dedicated. Yes, if anybody is interested in developing some new skills or sharing the skills that you have, please contact us at learning@alexandrapalace.com. Any questions?
Well, thank you very, very much. If you can stop sharing your screen, Mark, we can then, at least I can, in theory, see everybody. Now, again, you are all muted. So if you have a question, you please will wave your hand or do something and then unmute yourself. But before you do that, can I add a little tiny bit to the Ali Pali story? Thanks to my grandson, who fairly recently has been volunteering in Ali Pali kitchens, where he has been chopping vegetables and or washing up. And the reason for this very untoward activity on his part is that Ali Pali kitchens, of course, are huge, and they are now producing hundreds and hundreds, or possibly thousands and thousands of meals every day for all sorts of charities throughout North London. And it is something that I knew absolutely nothing about, but an incredibly worthwhile activity. So well done to Ali Pali. After which, questions. So please raise a hand or... Yes, Michael, can you unmute yourself? Alternatively,
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Right, you are now unmuted, so yes.
That was.
Can you speak up a bit or speak closer to your microphone, please?
Our remarkable presentations today. Now, a little birdie once told me that the palace is short of funds, and there was a project to convert all of the palace or part of the palace into flats to raise money. Would Louise deny or confirm that and let us know the history of that in a few minutes?
Well, that is one that I've never heard. So I'm always surprised by the mythology around the palace and the stories. The Act of Parliament is really specific in some places and really vague in others. And I started off thinking it was a really badly drafted piece of legislation, but over the last 5 years, I've learned to love it. And one of the areas that it's very specific on is that the palace cannot be used for residential purposes. So if anybody ever had that plan, they would have to change the Act of Parliament. And I imagine the whole population of North London would revolt.
Yeah.
Great.
Great. More questions? Yes. I will try and unmute you. I'm not sure if I have managed to. Can you unmute yourself, please? This is Nikki Naftalin. Yes.
Oh, that's actually Helen talking. I grew up in Muswell Hills, so it was sort of part of my growing up years. Then I moved away for many years and came back. And since then, we attended our son's medical graduation in one of your big halls, all beautifully decorated with palm trees. And last year we went to a charity dinner for a mental health charity, Jamie. And we were in, I think, your theatre, which was absolutely stunning, and very, very impressive. What I'd like to know is, how do you deal with publicity? Because this presentation has told me so many things I had no idea about, and would be very interested in knowing more about. Also, to know there's a theatre here, and we don't have to go to the West End necessarily to see a good play. How do we find out about that? And what's parking like there, please?
Okay, so it's great that you've been to the Palace and enjoyed it and you've had a great experience. In terms of parking, we've got something like 1,200 parking spaces. So there's no real issue with parking. Not all of our parking is open at the moment because we have a few issues with antisocial behaviour when the Palace is closed and high levels of usage during the pandemic. The best way to find out anything about the Palace, because we do so much, but our budgets are so small, is to go online to alexandrapalace.com. And you can find out on there quite simply the navigations. The navigation bar really helps if you click on it to find out what you need to know. So it's not just all about the events that we have on, but that should be really obvious and clear because that's obviously how we generate our money. But you can also find out about everything Mark was talking about, and you can also access our blog, which basically tells you different stories about different aspects of the Palace. But there is so much to tell. I could present for 3 hours and I wouldn't cover the half of it. So I definitely encourage you to, first of all, visit our website and also to look at Google Arts and Culture and put in Alexandra Palace to look at some of the online exhibitions.
Thank you.
Thank you. More questions? Can I see any more questions? Yes, Lydia, can you unmute yourself? Yes, I think I've you are unmuted anyway.
Okay, thank you very much. I came across this actually earlier today, which was about the opening up when the theatre just opened up and the events they had. And I wanted to show people that because they do some quite good publicity at times. I was aware that Alexandra Palace are doing some sort of golden ticket as a fundraiser, and I wanted to hear a bit more about that.
Okay, so we often use the golden ticket because most people have read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and it brings out the inner child in all of us. The golden ticket is something we're doing as a lottery. It's a small society lottery, so which is the legal terminology. But basically, for I think it's a £5, you can enter the lottery and you can win 20 tickets to 20 events for you and a companion, I believe, for a year. So you have to do the 20 events in a year, but the clock only starts ticking once you attend your first event. So that is everything we do, from music to an organ recital from the Willis organ that I didn't even mention, to something in the theatre, one of our open house tours, so you can see some of the derelict areas that are not accessible to the public. So it's a bargain because a ticket to a music gig these days is probably the best part of 50 quid. So for a £5, you can win the golden ticket that gives you that access.
I'd like to say I already have one and my husband has one, and well done for doing that. And also I'd like to thank Alexandra Palace because in the past you have come to our Rosh Chodesh group, the women's group, and spoken to us in a really informative way. So thank you for supporting us.
Thank you. And there are just, I think there's only 1 or 2 days left to enter that lottery.
Brilliant, thanks.
Great. Questions? Yes, we have Nikki this time.
Yeah, that was fascinating. I had no idea that that amount of activity was going on. Not every borough in London has an Ali Pali. And I wonder whether you either share what you do with other and learn from and learn with other boroughs in London, and whether people who live in other boroughs in London have access to the sort of activities that you can provide.
So the Park and Palace were created for the public, and that means everybody, not just all the different groups we've mentioned, but that also means geographically. So a lot of our creative learning work at the moment is very much focused on Haringey, because our creative learning work has only been going a few years, and we're very much focused on Haringey, but we're very well networked with other providers across London and the country and across Haringey. And so it's not something that we rule out doing, but obviously we get something like 4 million visits a year to the site, and only around 1 million of those are actually coming to an event or activity that we put on. The rest are just coming to enjoy, and they come from all over. There is a high level of local visitation, but there's a huge amount of visits from the rest of the country. So it is very much an asset that is available to all. But some of the work, when we do presentations to groups locally, we often focus on the Haringey elements, but please don't think it's only for Haringey. It isn't.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? Well, while you're thinking of questions, I shall pose one of my own. I was fascinated to hear of Isaac Schoenberg, of whom I was totally unaware. Can you fill in anything about his background, achievements, or where we can find a little bit more about him?
So we'll send you the link to the Google Arts and Culture link, so you can go online and follow what we have found out so far. My knowledge is that he was a Russian Jewish immigrant, and I think he led the team. He was director of research, but he led the team, and he's a really interesting character, because whereas the John Logie Baird team was very hierarchical, he was almost like the kind of leader manager that we're trying to breed today. He was very inclusive and collegiate and very sort of not of his time, and I think that's why they were successful, because he really utilized the skills of all of his team. And so it's definitely the Schoenberg archive, the family archive, we've got a really good relationship with. And as I say, it is a story that we're still exploring, and we would love to do a physical exhibition in the East Court, and hopefully we'll be able to tell more. The head of our collections and interpretation, I would say team, but there is only one person, helped by volunteers, is definitely a greater font of knowledge on Sir Isaac than I am. She's massively passionate about the story, and she's going to be disappointed that I haven't remembered more. But definitely, we'll send you the link to the Google Arts and Culture, because that's as much as we know at the moment, but I guarantee Kirsten knows more.
Thank you very, very much. And in the absence of any burning questions, let me, on everybody's behalf, thank Louise and Mark, and indeed Natalie in the background, very, very, very much indeed, for a totally fascinating afternoon, which I am sure has told all of us a hell of a lot more than we ever knew or even thought about not knowing about Alexandra Palace. And it has certainly sharpened my interest in going to see the modern reconstituted derelict theatre, and at some point I hope to see a performance there. So on behalf of us all, thank you both very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
And except we're all muted, and I shall try and unmute us, but a big round of silent applause. And before you all go, let me tell you about the next 2 meetings leading up to Rosh Hashanah. We have 2 more meetings before Yom Tov, which, given the lead up to Rosh Hashanah, I think are actually very, very appropriate.
No, it was lovely before. No, it was only up to.
In 2 weeks' time, on August the 26th, Deborah Cohen and Ingrid Selman will be talking to us and introducing the House of Life at Willesden Jewish Cemetery. And 2 weeks later, on the 9th of September, Professor Adrian Lister will be Finding Darwin's God. After which, if you sign up properly, you'll be in shul for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And meanwhile, I look forward very, very much indeed to seeing you all at our next 2 Zoom meetings. And once again, a huge thank you to the Ali Pali team for talking to us. So thank you all very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Very.
Get that out.
Okay, I'm going, can you, it's the parasol on the table.